I've always been tech-savvy. I work in IT security, and part of my job is understanding how cybercriminals operate. So when I heard about the dark web, I was curious from a professional standpoint. I wanted to see what was actually there, separate fact from fiction. This was about 4 years ago. I set up a secure environment on a separate computer, nothing connected to my personal data, using Tor browser, VPN, the whole 9 yards. I thought I was being careful. I thought I knew what I was doing. I started exploring. Most of it was boring. Marketplaces selling things I had no interest in. Forums filled with paranoid discussions. Websites that looked like they were built in 1998. Nothing shocking. Nothing that justified the horror stories people tell about the dark web. Then I found a forum dedicated to data security. It seemed legitimate, discussing encryption methods, vulnerabilities, things relevant to my work. I created an account using a throwaway email and started reading through the threads. One thread caught my attention. It was titled Real-World Penetration Testing Tools and claimed to have software that could identify security weaknesses in home networks. As someone who works in security, I was interested in testing my own network's vulnerabilities. A user in the thread offered to share the software privately. They sent me a direct message with a download link and instructions. The file was small, only about 15 megabytes, packaged as a compressed archive. I should have been more suspicious. I should have analyzed the file more carefully before running it. But I was on a separate computer, isolated from my main systems. I thought, even if it was malicious, it couldn't do any real damage. I downloaded the file and extracted it. Inside was a single executable and a text file with instructions. The instructions said to run the program, enter my network information, and it would scan for vulnerabilities. Simple enough. I ran the program. A command. Window opened, showing lines of code scrolling past. It looked like it was doing what it claimed, scanning network ports, testing protocols. After about 2 minutes, the window closed and a report file appeared on the desktop. The report looked professional. It listed several potential vulnerabilities in my home network, explained what they were, and suggested fixes. It seemed legitimate. I was actually impressed. Then, about an hour later, something strange happened. I got a text message on my personal phone. A phone number I'd never shared on the dark web, that wasn't connected to my test computer in any way. The message said, "Nice security setup, but not good enough." My blood went cold. I grabbed my test computer and started scanning for running processes. That's when I found it. The program I'd downloaded hadn't just scanned my network. It had installed a backdoor, and it was still running, hidden in the background. I immediately disconnected the computer from the network and shut it down. Then I checked my main computer, my phone, everything. I ran every security scan I knew how to run. The backdoor had done more than just access my test system. Somehow, it had mapped my entire home network. It had identified every device connected to my Wi-Fi, my laptop, my phone, my smart TV, everything. And it had extracted information from all of them. The text message proved they had accessed my phone. They had my contacts, my messages, probably my location history, everything. I spent the next 3 days wiping systems, changing passwords, securing everything I could think of. I reported the incident to my company's security team, explained what happened without mentioning I'd been on the dark web for personal curiosity. But the messages kept coming. Not frequently, maybe once every few days. Always from different numbers. Always vague threats or comments proving they still had access to my information. One message included a photo of my house, taken from the street. Another mentioned my girlfriend's name, someone I'd never discussed online anywhere. The worst message came about 2 weeks after the initial infection. It was a screenshot of my company's internal network structure. Somehow, through my home network and work laptop, they'd gained access to my employer's systems. The message said, "We could do a lot of damage with this, but we won't, as long as you cooperate." That's when I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. They'd leveraged my personal compromise to access a Fortune 500 company's network. If this got out, I wouldn't just lose my job, I'd probably face criminal charges for the security breach. They started making demands, small things at first. They wanted me to identify specific vulnerabilities in systems I had access to, not to exploit them, they said, just to document them. They promised they wouldn't use the information, they just wanted to test their capabilities. I was trapped. If I refused, they'd release information about my company's vulnerabilities, probably sell it to the highest bidder. If I cooperated, I was actively helping cybercriminals target my own employer. Either way, my career was over if anyone found out. I did what they asked for about 3 weeks. I documented vulnerabilities, sent encrypted reports, hated myself for every keystroke. Then I made a decision. I anonymously tipped off my company's security team about the potential breach. I didn't mention my involvement, I just sent them enough information to start investigating and securing the vulnerabilities. The company went into lockdown mode. They brought in external security consultants, ran comprehensive audits, and patched everything they found. It was chaos for a few weeks, and I spent every day terrified someone would trace the breach back to me. But they never did. The external team concluded it was a targeted phishing attempt that had been caught early. My anonymous tip was credited with preventing a major breach. I even got a company-wide email thanking the security-conscious employee who'd reported the suspicious activity. The messages from my blackmailers stopped after that. Whether they realized the access was closed or they'd moved on to easier targets, I don't know, but the silence was almost worse than the threats. I kept waiting for them to come back, to make new demands, to reveal what I'd done. I went to the police, showed them the messages, explained about the malware. They took a report but said without more specific threats, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested changing my phone number, being careful about security, the usual advice. I did change my number. I also moved apartments, got a new ISP, essentially started fresh with all my digital accounts. The messages stopped after that, but the damage was done. Here's what bothers me most. I work in IT security. I thought I knew what I was doing. I took precautions that would seem excessive to most people, and it still wasn't enough. The dark web isn't what people think it is. It's not some mysterious place full of hitmen and horror. Most of it is boring. But scattered throughout that boredom are people who are very, very good at what they do. People who see someone like me, someone curious, someone who thinks they're being careful as an easy target. That software I downloaded probably infected dozens of people. Some of them probably don't even know it yet. The people who made it are patient. They collect information slowly, wait for the right moment to use it. I still work in IT security, but I've never accessed the dark web again. And when people ask me about it, when they say they're curious, I tell them what happened to me. Most of them don't believe me, or they think I'm exaggerating to scare them. I wish I was exaggerating. I wish I could tell them it was all just a learning experience, a close call that ended harmlessly, but I can't, because even now, 4 years later, I sometimes wonder if they're still watching. If somewhere in my systems, some piece of code I never found is still reporting back. I check my security obsessively. I monitor my network traffic. I examine every strange email, every unexpected text. Maybe I'm paranoid, or maybe I finally understand how vulnerable we all really are. I made a stupid decision 3 years ago. I was broke, desperate, and I'd heard you could make money on the dark web doing things that weren't technically legal but weren't seriously harmful either. I'm not proud of it, but I'm telling you this so you understand why I was there in the first place. I was looking for someone who needed basic web design work. There are forums on the dark web where people post job requests, usually for things they can't advertise on regular freelance sites. I figured I could do some design work, get paid in Bitcoin, and no one would be hurt. I found a posting from someone who needed a website built. They were vague about what it was for, but the pay was good $2,000 worth of Bitcoin for about 20 hours of work. The only catch was that I had to communicate through encrypted channels and deliver the work through a specific platform. I took the job. The client sent me specifications and design requirements. It looked like they wanted a simple e-commerce site, nothing too complicated. I built it over the course of a week, testing everything to make sure it worked properly. When I delivered the finished site, the client seemed happy. They asked me to make a few minor adjustments, which I did. Then they said they'd send payment within 24 hours. The payment never came. Instead, I got a message from a different username. They said they were the client's business partner, and there was a problem with the website. They needed me to log into the site's backend and make some emergency fixes. This should have been a red flag. But I wanted to get paid, and I thought if I refused, I'd lose the $2,000 I'd already earned. So I agreed. They sent me login credentials and a link to the admin panel. I logged in and found what looked like a normal e-commerce backend. Products, orders, customer information, all the usual database tables. But then I noticed something strange. The product listings weren't for normal items. They were coded with numbers and letters that didn't make sense. And the customer orders had shipping addresses that looked suspicious, multiple orders going to the same locations, addresses that were just post office boxes or warehouse districts. I started to realize this wasn't a legitimate business. I didn't know exactly what they were selling, but I knew it was something illegal, something serious. I immediately logged out and sent a message saying I couldn't help them anymore. I said I wanted my original payment and then we'd be done. They responded quickly, saying that wasn't how this worked. They said I'd built the site, I'd accessed their database. I knew what they were doing. I was already involved. Then came the real threat. They sent me a file. It contained screenshots of my personal information, my real name, my address, my family members' names and addresses. Information I'd never shared with them, that I'd never connected to my dark web activities. They said if I didn't continue working with them, maintaining the site and making updates as needed, they'd report me to law enforcement as the person running the operation. They'd frame me as the main operator, and they had enough evidence to make it believable. I was terrified. I'd been stupid. I'd taken a job I shouldn't have taken, and now I was trapped. I couldn't go to the police because I'd actually built the site. I couldn't just disappear because they knew who I was and where I lived. The demands escalated quickly. At first, they just wanted maintenance, fixing bugs, updating product listings, processing orders, but then they started asking for more. They wanted me to integrate payment systems that were clearly designed for money laundering. They wanted tracking systems that would help them monitor their shipments and avoid law enforcement detection. Every time I completed a task, I told myself it would be the last one, that I'd find a way out after this. But there was never a way out. Each task made me more complicit, gave them more evidence to use against me if I tried to leave. I started researching them obsessively, trying to figure out who they were, where they operated from, anything that might give me leverage or a way to expose them without exposing myself. But they were careful. Every communication was encrypted and routed through multiple proxies. The website was hosted on servers in countries with no extradition treaties. The Bitcoin payments went through mixing services that made them impossible to trace. I even considered hiring my own hacker to take down the site, to destroy their operation from the inside. But I had no money. I still hadn't been paid for my original work, and they certainly weren't paying me for the ongoing maintenance. I was trapped in a cycle of unpaid labor for criminals, with my freedom as collateral. For the next 2 months, I maintained that website. Every time they asked me to make changes, I did it. I felt sick every time I logged in, knowing what that site was being used for, knowing I was helping them. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of conversations, records of tasks they'd asked me to complete, copies of their threats. I kept it all in an encrypted file on a USB drive hidden in my apartment. I figured if they eventually did try to frame me, I'd at least have evidence that I was coerced. Then, one day, the site went down. I tried to access it and got an error message. I waited to hear from my clients but got nothing. Days passed. No messages, no contact. I later found out through news reports that there had been a major law enforcement operation. Multiple dark web marketplaces had been shut down simultaneously. The operation I'd been working for was one of them. I spent weeks in absolute terror, waiting for police to show up at my door. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept imagining them going through the site's code, finding my fingerprints all over it, connecting it back to me. Every news update about the operation made my anxiety worse. They'd arrested 17 people across 5 countries. They'd seized millions in cryptocurrency. They'd shut down networks that had been operating for years. And somewhere in all that evidence, somewhere in the servers they'd seized, was my work. I consulted with a lawyer, Hypothetically, I didn't tell him it was me, just asked what would happen to someone in that situation. He said that coercion might be a defense, but it would depend on the evidence. If prosecutors could show the person had profited or had opportunities to report the crime, the coercion defense would be weak. I hadn't profited, I'd never received the original payment they promised. But I also hadn't reported it. For 2 months, I'd maintained a criminal enterprise's infrastructure. That fact alone would be enough to bury me. I started having panic attacks. I'd be at the grocery store and see someone in a dark suit and convince myself they were federal agents. I'd hear a car door close outside my apartment and freeze, certain it was finally happening. 3 months passed, then 6 months, then a year. The news about the operation faded. New scandals took over the headlines, and I was still free, still living my life, still waiting for the consequences that never came. But they never came. Either the operators had been careful enough not to leave evidence connecting me to the site, or law enforcement had bigger targets to focus on. I don't know which. What I do know is that one of the arrested operators took a plea deal. I found out because his sentencing was covered in a tech news blog I follow. The article mentioned that he'd cooperated with investigators, provided information about the network's structure and operations. It said his cooperation had been instrumental in the investigation. That scared me more than anything else. If he'd cooperated fully, if he'd given them everything, why hadn't they come for me? Either he'd protected me, kept my involvement secret, as some kind of insurance policy, or the investigators had decided I wasn't worth pursuing. Neither option made me feel safe. I destroyed the computer I'd used for the work. I closed all my cryptocurrency accounts. I stopped using the dark web entirely. I went completely straight, took a regular job doing legitimate web design, and tried to rebuild my life. But I still worry. Digital evidence doesn't disappear. Somewhere in some law enforcement database, there might be files from that operation. If anyone ever looked closely enough, they might find traces leading back to me. I think about turning myself in sometimes, telling the whole story, offering to cooperate, hoping they'd be lenient because I was coerced. But I'm afraid that admitting to it would be worse than the small chance they'll ever find me on their own. The statute of limitations varies depending on the charges. For some federal crimes, it's 5 years. For others, it's longer. I keep track of the dates, counting down, hoping that one day I'll be legally safe, even if I'm never emotionally safe. So I live with it, every day, wondering if this will be the day it catches up to me. Every time I see a police car, every unexpected knock on the door, my heart starts racing. The dark web isn't anonymous. That's the big lie. Everything you do there leaves traces. And the people you meet there aren't all harmless vendors and curious explorers. Some of them are professionals who know exactly how to trap you, how to manipulate you, how to make you complicit in things you never intended to be part of. I tell people now, if you're thinking about making money on the dark web, don't. Whatever you think you're getting into, it's worse. Whatever precautions you think will keep you safe, they won't. And once you're involved, getting out is nearly impossible. I got lucky. I got out before things got worse, before I ended up in prison or worse. But that luck could run out any day, and I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for consequences I thought I could avoid. I need to tell someone about this. I can't go to the police for reasons that will become clear, and I can't tell anyone who knows me because they wouldn't understand. So I'm telling you, 2 years ago, I was going through a difficult time. I'd lost my job, broken up with my girlfriend, and was spending way too much time alone in my apartment. I started staying up all night, sleeping during the day, existing in this weird nocturnal bubble where normal life didn't seem real. That's when I started exploring the dark web more seriously. At first, it was just curiosity, something to do during those long nights. But then, it became an obsession. I wanted to see everything, to understand this hidden part of the internet that most people never accessed. I found my way into various forums and chat rooms. Most of them were boring or disturbing in predictable ways, people selling drugs, sharing illegal content, discussing conspiracy theories. But then someone in a chat room mentioned a live stream that was supposed to be showing right now. They posted a link. Several people in the chat said they were watching, making comments about what they were seeing. My curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the link. It opened a new page with a video player. The stream was already playing. At first, I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. It was a dark room, shot from what looked like a fixed camera position. Low-quality video, grainy and compressed. Then I saw movement. A person entered the frame, walking slowly across the room. They were wearing ordinary clothes, jeans and a t-shirt. They looked young, maybe early 20s. They sat down in a chair that was visible in the center of the room. The person just sat there, not doing anything, not speaking, just sitting. The chat in the stream had several dozen people watching. Some of them were making comments, but they were vague things like, "Here we go," or "About time." I watched for maybe 5 minutes. Nothing happened. The person just sat in the chair, occasionally shifting position. I was about to close the stream when someone walked into frame. This second person was wearing dark clothes, and their face was covered with a mask. They approached the seated person and started speaking to them. I couldn't hear the audio, either the stream had no sound or my computer wasn't playing it properly. The seated person looked scared. They were shaking their head, trying to stand up, but the masked person pushed them back down. The chat was going wild now, people typing rapidly, but I couldn't process what they were saying because I was focused on what was happening on screen. The masked person pulled out something from their pocket. At first I thought it was a phone, but then I realized it was some kind of remote control or device. They pointed it at the seated person. Nothing visible happened, but the seated person's reaction was immediate and extreme. They jerked violently, their body contorting, then went completely still. The masked person put the device away and left the frame. The seated person didn't move. They just sat there, perfectly still, in the same position for the next several minutes. The chat had gone quiet too. People were still watching. The viewer count showed over 100 people now, but no one was commenting. Then the masked person came back into frame. They walked up to the seated person and checked their pulse or something. I couldn't quite see. Then they dragged the person out of the chair and off screen. The stream continued. Just an empty room. Empty chair. Nothing happening. But people were still watching. Over 200 viewers now. I closed the stream. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what I'd just seen. Maybe it was fake, some kind of elaborate performance art. Maybe it was real and I'd just watched something terrible. I didn't know. I tried to find the link again to verify what I'd seen, but it was gone. The chat room where it had been posted was gone too. Everything had disappeared like it never existed. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head, trying to understand it. Had that been a real person? Had something actually happened to them, or was it staged? The next day, I tried searching for any information about live streams on the dark web, any news about something that might have happened. Nothing. No reports, no discussions, nothing. But I couldn't let it go. I started obsessively searching missing persons reports, trying to match the person I'd seen in the stream with someone who'd been reported missing. I checked multiple databases, scoured news sites, looked for any trace of what I'd witnessed. I found 3 possible matches over the next week. Young people in their 20s who'd gone missing around the same time I'd watched the stream. 2 were in the United States, 1 was in Canada. All of them had disappeared without a trace, no leads, no suspects. I couldn't prove any connection. The video quality had been too poor to identify the person clearly. I didn't know where the stream had originated from, what country it was in, anything that might help narrow it down. All I had was a vague memory of a face I'd seen for maybe 10 minutes on a grainy video. I considered sending anonymous tips to the police about the cases, but what would I say? I saw something on the dark web that might be related. Without evidence, without the link to the stream, it would be useless. And it might draw attention to me, make me a person of interest in whatever had happened. A few days later, I got a message. It came through a dark web messaging app I'd installed, but rarely used. The message was from an anonymous account. It said, "You watched. We know." That was it. No explanation, no demands, just that simple statement. I immediately uninstalled the app, wiped my computer's browser history, ran every security scan I could find. I checked my computer for any signs it had been compromised. Nothing obvious. But the messages kept coming, through different channels. Sometimes through that same messaging app, after I'd reinstall it to check. sometimes through email addresses I'd never given out. Always the same basic message. They knew I'd watched, and they were watching me now. One message included a screenshot. It was a frame from the stream, showing the seated person's face. Below the image was text, "Remember them. We remember you." Another message came with my home address, not just the building, but my apartment number. They knew exactly where I lived. The message said, "Close your blinds." I did. I closed every blind in my apartment and kept them closed for weeks. I started checking the street outside constantly, looking for anyone watching my building. I bought a security camera for my front door. I became paranoid about every person I saw in my neighborhood. The messages became more specific. They'd mention things I'd done that day, where I'd gone, what I'd bought, who I'd talked to. They weren't making threats exactly, just proving they were watching, proving they could reach me whenever they wanted. I moved. I broke my lease early, paid the penalty, and found a new apartment across town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I used a friend's address for my mail forwarding. I thought maybe changing locations would help. The first message at my new address came 3 days after I moved in. It said, "Nice neighborhood, quieter than the last place." That's when I realized this wasn't just about the stream. This was about control. They were demonstrating that no matter what I did, they could find me. They could track me. They wanted me to know I was never safe. I stopped using the dark web completely. I reset my computer to factory settings. I changed all my passwords. But the messages still came, less frequently now, but consistently enough to remind me they hadn't forgotten. Here's what terrifies me most. I don't know what I watched. If it was real, if something terrible actually happened to that person, then I'm a witness to a crime and I can't report it because I can't prove it happened. I don't have the link. I don't have screenshots. I have nothing except my own memory. And if it was fake, if it was some kind of trap designed to identify and track people who would watch that kind of content, then I fell for it completely. They have my information, they know I watched, and they're reminding me periodically that they can reach me whenever they want. I've thought about going to the police anyway, just telling them everything and letting them decide what to do, but what would I say? I was on the dark web, I clicked a link to a stream I shouldn't have watched, and now I'm receiving vague, threatening messages? They'd either think I was crazy, or they'd investigate me as someone who was actively seeking out illegal content, so I live with it. The messages have slowed down, maybe one every few months now. Always just a reminder. We know. Still watching. Don't forget. Short, simple, impossible to trace. I got a regular job again. I rebuilt my life. I don't go on the dark web anymore. I barely use the internet for anything beyond work and basic communication. I'm careful, always looking over my shoulder, digitally speaking, but I know they're still there, whoever they are. The people running that stream, the people tracking who watched it, the people who have decided to remind me periodically that they can reach me. The dark web isn't curiosity-satisfying exploration. It's not some adventure into hidden parts of the internet. It's a trap. Every link you click, every stream you watch, every forum you visit, someone is tracking it. Someone is collecting information. Someone is building a profile on you. And once you're in their database, once they decide you're worth monitoring, you never really leave. You just wait, wondering when they'll decide to do more than send messages, when they'll decide you're worth something, more than just surveillance. I'm still waiting, still wondering, still checking my messages every day, dreading what I might find. I was 32 when my father passed away unexpectedly. This was spring of 2019. He'd had a heart attack in his sleep, quick and painless, they said, but devastating for our family. I was his only child, so the responsibility of sorting through his belongings fell to me. He'd lived alone for years after my mother died when I was in college. His house was full of memories, boxes of old photos, documents, and technology from different eras of his life. One afternoon, while cleaning out his attic, I found several boxes of old VHS tapes. Most were labeled in my father's handwriting: family vacations, my childhood birthdays, school plays, but one tape caught my attention. It was labeled Wedding 1987, in unfamiliar handwriting. My parents got married in 1985, so this wasn't their wedding. The tape looked old, the plastic case yellowed with age. I was curious. My father rarely talked about his life before my mother. I knew he'd been engaged once before, briefly, in his 20s, but the engagement had ended. He never explained why, and always changed the subject when I asked. I wondered if this was footage from that relationship. I took the tape home along with an old VCR I'd found in my father's garage. I hooked it up to my TV, expecting to see a wedding ceremony from the 80s. Maybe it would give me insight into that part of my father's life he never discussed. When I pressed play, the screen showed the typical grainy VHS quality, but what I saw wasn't a typical wedding. The footage started normally enough. A church interior, decorated with white flowers and ribbons. Guests were arriving, taking their seats. The camera work was amateur, probably handheld by a family member. I recognized the style of dress and hair from the mid-80s. Everything looked appropriate for a wedding video from that era. Then the camera focused on a woman in a white wedding dress, standing in what looked like a back room of the church. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair, styled in the big curls popular in that decade. She was looking at herself in a mirror, adjusting her veil. She looked nervous but happy. A few other women were around her, presumably bridesmaids, helping with final preparations. The camera pulled back, and I saw the person filming. There was a mirror in the room, and for a moment, the videographer was reflected. It was my father, much younger, maybe 26 or 27. He was dressed in a suit, holding the camera. He said something to the bride, and she turned and smiled at him. The audio was muffled, but I heard her say, "I can't believe this is really happening." My father's voice responded, "Neither can I." I felt strange watching this. My father, decades ago, at someone else's wedding, or was he supposed to be the groom? The way the bride looked at him, the intimate setting, suggested this was his wedding. But if he married someone in 1987, what happened to her? He married my mother in 1985. The timeline didn't make sense. The footage continued. The ceremony began. I watched as guests filled the church. Then something odd happened. As the bride started walking down the aisle, the footage became distorted. Not like a damaged tape, but like something had interfered with the recording. The image flickered, jumped, showed strange artifacts. When it stabilized, the bride was at the altar, but the person standing next to her wasn't my father. It was another man, someone I didn't recognize. I rewound the tape and watched again. The same thing happened. During the walk down the aisle, the footage glitched. When it cleared, a different groom was there. I checked the tape, thinking maybe it was damaged or recorded over. But the distortion was too precise, too localized to that specific moment. The ceremony continued. The couple exchanged vows. I listened carefully to the names. The bride was named Caroline. The groom was named Robert. Not my father's name, but I'd seen my father in the earlier footage, clearly part of the wedding party, clearly intimate with the bride. What was going on? Then the footage cut abruptly. No reception, no celebration, just a hard cut to black. But the tape wasn't over. After a few seconds of darkness, new footage appeared. It was darker, grainier, clearly filmed later. It showed the exterior of a house at night. The camera was shaking slightly, like whoever held it was walking. They approached the house, went up to a window, and filmed inside. Through the window, I could see two people. The bride from earlier, Caroline, still in her wedding dress, and the other groom, Robert. They were in what looked like a living room. The camera zoomed in, focusing on them. They seemed to be arguing. Caroline was crying. Robert looked angry. The camera stayed on them for almost 3 minutes, just watching, not recording a celebration or happy moment. Just surveillance. Then the footage cut again. Another location, a different house. Daytime now. The camera was filming from a car parked across the street. I could see Caroline through a window, now in regular clothes, talking on a phone. She looked upset. The date stamp in the corner showed this was several months after the wedding. The camera just watched her for 5 minutes. No audio, no context, just watching. This pattern continued throughout the rest of the tape. Different dates, different locations, always filming Caroline. At a grocery store, at a park, getting into her car, always from a distance, always without her knowledge. Months passed according to the date stamps. The footage spanned nearly 2 years. My father had been stalking this woman. The final piece of footage was the most disturbing. It was dated November 1989, over 2 years after the wedding. The setting was a hospital parking lot at night. The camera filmed the entrance. After several minutes, Caroline emerged with Robert. She was holding a baby. They got into a car and drove away. The camera followed the car out of the parking lot. The footage ended there. I sat in shock. I'd just watched evidence of my father stalking a woman for 2 years. A woman who'd apparently chosen another man over him. He'd filmed her wedding, then spent years recording her life without her knowledge. The obsession documented on that tape was terrifying. I didn't know what to do with this information. My father was dead. I couldn't confront him or demand explanations. I searched online for information about Caroline and Robert, using the church location from the wedding footage. I found an obituary. Caroline had died in 2003 in a car accident. Robert had remarried and moved out of state. They'd had one child, born in 1989, who would now be in their 30s. I debated contacting them, telling them about the tape. But what would I say? Your mother was stalked by my father decades ago, and I have video evidence. It seemed cruel to dredge up the past, especially to someone who'd lost their mother years ago. And what good would it do? Instead, I destroyed the tape. I pulled out the ribbon inside, exposed it to sunlight, and disposed of it. I didn't want that footage to exist anymore. Didn't want evidence of my father's darkest behavior preserved. But I couldn't destroy my memory of it. I can't unknow what I learned about him. I spent weeks researching obsessive behavior and stalking. I learned that what my father did was criminal, that Caroline had been victimized even though she might never have known it. I wondered if there were other tapes, other women he'd obsessed over. I searched his belongings thoroughly, but found nothing else like that wedding video. My relationship with my father's memory changed after that. I'd loved him, grieved his death, thought I knew him, but the man on that tape was a stranger, a predator who'd channeled his rejection into years of surveillance. I wondered if my mother knew, if she'd married him, knowing he had this capacity for obsession. Or if she'd been another target who, unlike Caroline, he'd successfully claimed. I'm 35 now. 3 years have passed since I found that tape. I still think about it. About Caroline living her life, raising her child, never knowing someone watched her from the shadows for years. About my father, who seemed so normal, hiding such a disturbing fixation. About how well we think we know our parents, and how wrong we can be. I've become paranoid about being filmed. I check for cameras, cover my laptop webcam, look over my shoulder, because I learned that sometimes the person watching isn't some random creep. Sometimes it's someone who seems trustworthy, someone who knows how to hide in plain sight, someone who could be anyone's father, anyone's husband, anyone's friend. And sometimes we don't discover who they really were until it's too late to ask them why. I was 29 when I bought my first house. This was fall of 2020, and I'd been saving for years. The house was a foreclosure, cheap because it needed work, but it was mine. A small 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood outside Seattle. The previous owners had apparently left in a hurry. The bank had foreclosed on them after they stopped making payments and just disappeared. Left a lot of their stuff behind. When I moved in, I spent the first few weeks cleaning and renovating. The house was dated but structurally sound. As I cleared out the basement, I found boxes the previous owners had left. Most were junk, old magazines, broken electronics. But one box contained something interesting. A digital video recorder, the kind used for home security systems, and several hard drives. I was curious if the DVR still worked. I brought it upstairs, plugged it in, and connected it to my TV. The system powered on. It had 4 camera feeds, labeled front door, backyard, garage, and basement. The hard drives contained months of footage from before the foreclosure. I decided to watch some of it, partly out of curiosity, partly because I wanted to understand the house's history. I started with footage from 6 months before the foreclosure date. The timestamps showed it was from March 2020, right when COVID lockdowns began. The front door camera showed a man and woman leaving for work in the morning, coming home in the evening. They looked to be in their 40s, professional types, a normal couple living a normal life. I fast-forwarded through days of footage, the same routine. Then something changed. The woman stopped leaving the house. The man continued his daily departures and returns, but the woman stayed home. I assumed she'd started working remotely because of the pandemic. Nothing unusual. But then I noticed her behavior on the interior cameras. The basement and garage cameras had angles that captured parts of the first floor through doorways. I could see her moving through the house during the day, and her movements were strange. She'd stand in one spot for long periods, just staring at walls. She'd walk in circles around the living room. She'd go to windows and peer out, not casually, but intensely, like she was watching for something. I continued watching, fast-forwarding through the days. The woman's behavior got stranger. She started talking to herself. I couldn't hear audio on the footage, but I could see her having animated conversations with empty rooms. She'd gesture, react like someone was responding, but she was alone. The man seemed not to notice. He'd come home, they'd interact normally, then he'd leave for work the next day. Then one night in April, the footage showed something disturbing. It was around 2 a.m. The bedroom was out of camera range, but the basement camera captured movement. The woman came down the stairs into the basement. She was in pajamas, barefoot. She walked to the far corner of the basement where there were some storage shelves. She started moving boxes, searching for something. She pulled out a large plastic container and opened it. From the angle of the camera, I couldn't see what was inside the container. But the woman reached in and pulled something out. She held it up, looking at it. It appeared to be a piece of clothing, maybe a dress. She pressed it to her face, like she was smelling it. Then she started crying. Not quiet tears, but sobbing, her whole body shaking. She clutched the clothing and sank to the floor, crying for over 20 minutes. The man came downstairs. I saw him appear on the camera, approaching her. She didn't seem to hear him at first. He touched her shoulder, and she jumped, startled. They had what looked like an argument. He tried to take the clothing from her. She wouldn't let go. Eventually, he gave up and went back upstairs. She stayed in the basement for another hour, just sitting there holding whatever she'd found. This happened several more times over the next weeks. Always at night. Always the same container. Always the same emotional breakdown. During the day, around the man, she seemed relatively normal. But when he was gone or sleeping, she'd go to that basement corner and pull out items from that container. Different items each time, but always resulting in the same crying, the same grief. Then in May, the footage showed the man bringing home someone else. A woman, maybe in her 30s, who looked similar to the first woman but younger. They came into the house together. The first woman was there, saw them, and her reaction was bizarre. She smiled, greeted the younger woman warmly, like she was expecting her. The three of them sat in the living room together. Based on their body language and interactions, it seemed like the younger woman was their daughter. But something was off. The daughter kept looking at her mother with concern. She'd tried to engage her in conversation, but the mother's responses seemed disconnected. At one point, the daughter went to the basement, presumably to retrieve something. I saw her on the basement camera. She went to the same corner where the mother had been going at night. She found the plastic container, opened it, and looked inside. Her face changed. She looked horrified. She closed the container quickly and left the basement. The daughter left later that evening. After she was gone, I saw the man and woman arguing in the kitchen. It was a serious argument, both of them upset. The man was gesturing toward the basement. The woman was shaking her head, crying. He tried to hug her. She pushed him away and ran upstairs. The footage from the next few weeks showed escalating tension. The man stayed home more, like he was watching the woman. She continued her strange behaviors, but now she seemed to be hiding them when he was around. She'd wait until he fell asleep, then sneak to the basement. The daughter came back several times, always looking worried. There were more arguments. Then in June, the footage abruptly ended. The last recording showed the woman in the basement at night, alone, sitting with that container open beside her. She was talking to herself, or to the items in the container. The footage just stopped mid-scene. No more recordings after that date. I checked the foreclosure documents. The bank had initiated foreclosure in July, 1 month after the footage ended. The couple had stopped making mortgage payments in June. They'd abandoned the house in August, leaving everything behind. No forwarding address, no contact information, just gone. I went back to the basement and looked for that plastic container. I found it in the same corner the woman had been accessing. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me didn't want to know, but I had to understand what had driven this woman to such behavior, what had apparently destroyed their lives. Inside the container were children's belongings, a small dress, pink and decorated with flowers, tiny shoes, a stuffed animal, a baby blanket, and at the bottom, a framed photograph of a little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, smiling at the camera. She looked like a younger version of the woman from the footage. There were also newspaper clippings. I read them carefully. They were from 2015. They detailed a drowning accident. A 4-year-old girl had drowned in a neighborhood pool. The parents were named. It was them, the couple from the security footage. They'd lost their daughter 5 years before the footage I'd been watching. Everything made sense now. The woman's breakdown, the obsessive visits to the basement, the items she'd held and cried over. She'd been grieving, unable to let go. The pandemic lockdown, being trapped at home with nothing but memories, had broken something in her. The man had tried to help, had brought their adult daughter to intervene, but nothing worked. The grief had consumed her until it consumed everything, including their home, their stability, their ability to function. I carefully repacked the container. I didn't know what to do with it. These were precious belongings, memories of a child lost, but the parents were gone, untraceable. I couldn't return the items to them. Throwing them away felt cruel. I ended up keeping the container, storing it back in that same corner of the basement. Maybe someday the family would come back for it. Maybe not. But I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Every time I went to the basement, I'd see that corner and imagine the woman sitting there, crying, holding her daughter's dress. I'd see the security footage playing in my mind, the deterioration of a family consumed by grief. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories of tragedy I'd witnessed through recorded footage. I sold the house 8 months later. I took a loss on it, but I didn't care. I couldn't live there, knowing what I knew. The new buyers had no idea about the footage, about the container in the basement, about what had happened to the previous owners. Maybe that was wrong of me. Maybe I should have told them, but I couldn't bring myself to share that story. It felt too private, too painful. I'm 32 now. 3 years have passed since I found that footage. I still wonder what happened to that family. If the woman got help, if they're together, or if the grief destroyed their marriage. If they ever think about the house they left behind, and the memories stored in a plastic container in a basement corner. I learned that sometimes found footage doesn't show paranormal horror. Sometimes it shows something more disturbing, real people breaking under the weight of loss. And sometimes watching that is more haunting than any ghost. I bought a used car in the summer of 2021. I was 27 and needed reliable transportation for my new job. The car was a 2017 sedan, good condition, reasonable price. The previous owner was an older man who'd traded it in at a dealership. I bought it from the dealer, went through the usual process, drove it home happy with my purchase. A few days later, I was cleaning out the glove compartment and found an SD card tucked in the back. It was the kind used in dash cams. I hadn't noticed a dash cam mounted on the windshield when I bought the car, but there were adhesive marks suggesting one had been there recently. The dealer must have removed it but missed the memory card. I was curious what might be on it, probably just boring highway footage. But maybe there'd be something interesting, an accident or road rage incident. I brought it inside and put it in my computer's SD card reader. The card had hundreds of video files, organized by date, spanning several months from late 2020 to Early 2021. I opened a random file from December 2020. The video showed the view through a windshield, driving on a highway at night. The dashcam had recorded the date, time, and GPS coordinates in the corner of the frame. The car was traveling north on I-5, somewhere in Oregon. The previous owner, an older male voice, was talking to someone on the phone through the car's speaker system. The conversation was mundane. He was talking to what sounded like his wife, discussing dinner plans. I fast-forwarded through the video, just highway driving, eventually exiting and pulling into a residential neighborhood. The car parked in a driveway. The video ended there. I opened another file, this one from January 2021. Similar content. Highway driving, phone conversations, arriving home. I was about to give up and delete the files when I noticed something strange. One file was much longer than the others. Most were 20 to 40 minutes, typical for a commute. But this one was over 3 hours long, and it was dated February 14th, 2021, Valentine's Day. I opened it. The video started the same way. Highway driving in daylight, GPS showing the car traveling north on I-5. But this time, the driver wasn't alone. There was a passenger, a woman, visible in the corner of the frame when the dashcam angle occasionally captured the interior. They were talking, but the audio was unclear. The conversation seemed pleasant. After about 30 minutes of highway driving, the car exited onto smaller roads, rural area, based on the scenery, forests on both sides. The conversation in the car had stopped, just silence and the sound of the engine. The GPS coordinates were taking them further from any major town. Eventually, the car pulled off onto a dirt road. The dashcam continued recording as the vehicle drove deeper into the forest. The road got rougher, just tire tracks through trees. After several minutes, the car stopped in a small clearing. The video continued recording. Nothing happened for about 10 minutes. Just the view of trees through the windshield. Then the driver's door opened. I heard the older man get out. His door closed. I could hear footsteps on gravel, walking around the car. The passenger door opened. The woman got out. More footsteps. Then voices, distant, arguing. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was clearly confrontational. The woman's voice was upset, almost pleading. The man's voice was calm but firm. The argument continued for several minutes. Then silence. Complete silence for almost 30 seconds. Then footsteps approaching the car. Just one set of footsteps. The driver's door opened. The man got back in. He was breathing heavily. The car started. I could see in the dashboard reflection that he was alone. The passenger seat was empty. The car drove back out of the clearing, back onto the dirt road, back to the highway. The entire drive back was silent. The man didn't make any phone calls, didn't say anything, just drove. The GPS tracked him back to the same house in Oregon where the other videos had ended. The file ended with the car pulling into the driveway. I sat staring at my computer screen. I'd just watched what looked like evidence of something terrible. A man had driven a woman to a remote forest location. There'd been an argument. Then he'd driven back alone. Where was the woman? I checked the date again. February 14th, 2021. I searched online for missing persons reports from Oregon around that date. I found one. A woman named Jennifer Martin, age 34, had been reported missing on February 15th, 2021. She was last seen leaving a Valentine's Day dinner with a man later identified as someone she'd been dating casually. The man had been questioned by police, but claimed he'd dropped her off at her apartment and didn't know what happened afterward. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him with anything. The case was still open. I looked at the dashcam video again. I couldn't see the woman's face clearly, enough to confirm it was Jennifer Martin. The man's face was never in frame, but the timing matched. Valentine's Day. The mysterious disappearance of his passenger in a remote location. It all fit too perfectly to be coincidence. I realized I needed to contact the police, but I was terrified. If this video showed what I thought it showed, then the previous owner of my car was potentially a murderer. A man who'd gotten away with it for over a year. Would he know I had this evidence? Would he come after me if I reported it? I made copies of the video file, backed it up multiple times, uploaded it to cloud storage with a delayed release in case anything happened to me. Then I contacted the Oregon State Police tip line. I explained I'd found a dashcam recording that might be relevant to the Jennifer Martin missing person case. They took my information and said a detective would contact me. 2 days later, I got a call from a detective. He asked me to email him the video file. I did. He called back 3 hours later. He said they were taking it very seriously. He asked where I'd gotten my car, who the previous owner was. I gave him all the information from the purchase paperwork. The detective said they'd be in touch and to be careful. A week went by. I didn't hear anything. I started to panic, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Then I saw a news story. A man in Oregon had been arrested in connection with the disappearance of Jennifer Martin. Police had recovered new evidence, including video footage, that led to the arrest. They'd also found remains in a forest area matching the GPS coordinates from the dashcam video. It was her. The man was the previous owner of my car. The detective called me again, thanked me for coming forward. He said the dashcam video had been the breakthrough they needed. They'd been able to use the GPS coordinates to locate the site where he'd left her body. The video also contradicted his statement about dropping her off at her apartment. Combined with other evidence they'd gathered, they had enough to charge him with murder. I felt relieved but also haunted. I'd been driving around in a car that had been used to transport a murder victim to her death. I'd sat in the same seat the killer had sat in. The car that I'd thought was just a good deal was actually evidence in a murder case. The detective told me the car would need to be seized as evidence. Insurance covered a replacement, but I didn't care about that. I just wanted to be disconnected from the whole situation. The case went to trial 8 months later. I had to testify about finding the SD card, about the video content. The defense tried to argue the video was tampered with, that I could have fabricated it, but forensic analysis proved it was authentic, recorded by the dashcam model originally in that car, with metadata matching the dates and locations. The jury convicted him. He got life in prison. Jennifer Martin's family thanked me afterward. They said they'd been living in agony, not knowing what happened to her, wondering if she was alive somewhere. My finding that forgotten SD card had given them answers and justice. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something I was never meant to see. I still think about that video sometimes. About the woman getting into that car on Valentine's Day, trusting the man driving, not knowing it was the last car ride she'd ever take. About how close that video came to being lost forever, deleted by a dealer, or destroyed by the previous owner if he'd remembered it was there. About how many other forgotten recordings might exist on old SD cards, showing crimes no one knows about, justice that never arrives, because the evidence sits unnoticed in a glove compartment or a junk drawer. I'm 30 now. 3 years have passed since I found that dashcam footage. I bought a different car immediately after the trial ended. I check it obsessively for anything the previous owner might have left behind. I installed my own dashcam, just in case I ever witness something I need to report. But mostly, I learned that sometimes found footage doesn't just show the past. Sometimes it changes the future. Sometimes it brings justice. And sometimes it reminds you that the most mundane objects, the most innocent purchases, can hide the darkest secrets. Halloween 2018 started like any other year. I was working as a cashier at a 24-hour gas station just outside Denver, pulling the night shift. I actually liked working Halloween. Customers came in wearing wild costumes. Everyone was in a good mood, and the tips were better than usual. Around 11 p.m., things started to slow down. The trick-or-treaters had gone home, and the adult parties were in full swing. I was alone in the store, scrolling through my phone when the door chime went off. A man walked in wearing what looked like an expensive werewolf costume. I mean, this thing was Hollywood quality, realistic fur, extended snout, sharp teeth, visible when he breathed. Even his hands had these elaborate claw gloves. The way he moved was perfect too, sort of hunched and predatory. I complimented his costume as he prowled through the aisles. He didn't respond, just made this low growling sound. Method actor, I figured. He spent maybe 5 minutes in the store, picking up beef jerky, energy drinks, and weirdly, several packages of raw ground beef from our small refrigerated section. When he came to the counter, I got a better look at the costume. The detail was insane. I could see individual hairs moving when he breathed, and his eyes, they must have been contacts, were this bright yellow color that seemed to glow under the fluorescence. The smell hit me then too. Not quite body odor, but something wild and musky, like wet dog mixed with something else I couldn't place. He paid in crumpled cash, and that's when I noticed the claws weren't gloves. They were attached to his actual fingers somehow, moving naturally as he counted out bills. The skin where they connected looked red and irritated. This guy had seriously committed to his costume. As I rang him up, he kept staring at me, not in a creepy way exactly, but like he was sizing me up, calculating something. When I handed him his change, our hands touched briefly. His skin was burning hot, like he had a serious fever. He left without saying a word, and I watched him walk across the parking lot. His car was parked in the shadows at the edge of the lot, a beat-up van with mud-covered plates. He threw his purchases in the back and drove off. 20 minutes later, a couple rushed in. They looked terrified, the woman crying, and the man's shirt torn and bloody. They said something had attacked them at the hiking trail parking area about a mile down the road. The man had deep scratches on his arm and shoulder, like claw marks. They said they'd been making out in their car when something started circling it. At first, they thought it was a bear, but then it stood up on two legs and started scratching at the windows. The thing was huge, covered in dark fur, with a long snout. When it couldn't get in, it had climbed onto the hood and started pounding on the windshield until it cracked. The man managed to start the car and peel out while the thing was still on the hood. It had rolled off and chased them for maybe 50 yards before disappearing into the woods. They came straight to my store to call the police. While we waited for the cops, I kept thinking about Werewolf Guy. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence, but when I mentioned the customer in the costume, the couple got even more upset. The woman said what attacked them wasn't wearing a costume. She said she'd seen its muscles moving under the fur, seen its breath fogging up their windshield. No costume could do that. The woman was shaking so bad, she could barely hold the cup of coffee I'd given her. She kept describing details, how the thing's ears had moved independently, tracking sounds, how its nose had twitched when it sniffed at their car. The man showed me his wounds. 4 parallel gashes, too wide to be from any normal animal. The bleeding wouldn't stop, just kept seeping through the paper towels we'd wrapped around his arm. The police took their reports seriously. There had been similar calls from other areas that night. Animal attacks, they said. Maybe a rabid bear or mountain lion. They warned me to keep the doors locked and call immediately if I saw anything unusual. 2 officers stayed behind to look at our security footage. They wanted to see if anyone suspicious had been in the area. I didn't mention Werewolf Guy at first, but something made me pull up that transaction. I wanted them to see what I'd seen, to confirm I wasn't going crazy. But when I pulled up the recording, something was wrong. The timestamp showed him entering the store, showed me talking to someone, showed me making a transaction, but there was no one else visible in the footage. Just me, apparently having a conversation with empty air, taking money from no one, handing change to nobody. The officers looked at me like I was having a breakdown. One of them asked if I'd been drinking, if maybe the stress of the night was getting to me. I insisted someone had been there, even showed them the transaction record in our system. Cash sale, $47.16. The money was in the register. But on the video, I was just standing there, moving my mouth, handling money that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The parking lot camera was even stranger. It showed his van clearly, but the driver's seat looked empty when he got in. The vehicle just started up and drove away on its own. The officers made copies of everything but told me it was probably a camera malfunction. Halloween brought out pranksters who liked to mess with technology, they said. After everyone left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow outside seemed to move. Every normal night, sound, the ice machine cycling, the coffee pot gurgling, made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I heard scratching at the back door. Long, deliberate scratches, like claws on metal. I didn't go check. I locked myself in the office with a baseball bat and waited for dawn. When my manager arrived at 6, there were deep gouges in the back door, 4 parallel lines, right through the metal. He blamed vandals, said we'd been having problems with kids damaging property. But I knew better. I spent the rest of my shift terrified, jumping at every sound. When morning came, I practically ran to my car. I quit that job 2 days later. Told my manager I needed to focus on school, but really, I just couldn't handle another night shift. Especially not alone. 3 weeks later, I saw a news story that made my blood run cold. A hiker had found remains in the woods near that trail. Not human remains. Deer, rabbits, even a coyote, all partially eaten, all killed in the same way. Throat torn out, body cavity opened, organs missing. The wildlife experts said it was unusual. Most predators don't kill multiple animals without eating them fully. These looked almost ritualistic. The police never found what attacked that couple. There were 3 more reports that Halloween night, torn clothes, claw marks, sightings of something big and bipedal. One witness, a drunk guy leaving a bar, swore he saw it transform. Said he watched a massive wolf-like creature shrink down, fur retracting, until a naked man stood in its place. The cops dismissed him as intoxicated, but his description of the man matched my customer, right down to the yellow eyes. The official explanation was a bear that had wandered into populated areas. They shot a black bear a week later and declared the problem solved. But the scratches didn't match bear claws. The behavioral pattern was all wrong. And bears don't pay for beef jerky with exact change. I still work retail, but never night shifts. And never, ever on Halloween. Sometimes I have nightmares about those yellow eyes, about that burning hot skin. Wake up, smelling that wild musk. And every October, when I see Halloween werewolf decorations in store windows, I remember that not all monsters are make-believe. Some of them walk among us, buying ground beef and energy drinks, waiting for the right night to hunt. Every kid in our neighborhood knew about the Pemberton house. It was this massive Victorian at the end of Sycamore Lane, and every Halloween, they gave out full-size candy bars. Not fun size, not mini, the real deal. Snickers, Milky Ways, Twix, you name it. Kids would hit that house 2 or 3 times a night, changing masks between visits. I was 34 in 2020, recently divorced, and had just moved back to my childhood neighborhood in Salem, Massachusetts, with my 8-year-old son Tyler. Halloween was different that year because of COVID. Lots of houses had set up candy chutes or tables at the end of driveways, but not the Pembertons. They were old school, wanted kids to come right up to the door like always. Tyler was so excited. He'd heard about the legendary full-size bars from the other kids and couldn't wait. We started our route around 6:30, hitting the regular houses first, saving the Pemberton place for last like dessert. The house looked exactly like I remembered from my own childhood. 3 stories, wraparound porch, Gothic windows. They'd gone all out with decorations, animated skeletons, fog machines, speakers playing creepy music. A line of kids stretched down their front walk. What I didn't remember from my childhood was how wrong the house felt. Maybe it was my adult awareness, but something about the place made my skin crawl. The fog from their machines seemed thicker than it should be, clinging to the ground like it was alive. The skeleton decorations were too anatomically correct, and their movements seemed less mechanical and more deliberate. "Mrs. Pemberton answered the door, and I swear she hadn't aged a day in 25 years. Same silver hair in a tight bun, same velvet dress, same too wide smile. She recognized me immediately, knew my maiden name and everything. Said she was so glad I'd moved back, that the neighborhood needed more original families. Her husband appeared behind her, and he looked exactly the same too. Not similar, exactly the same. Same horn-rimmed glasses, same sweater vest, same pattern of liver spots on his hands. I remembered those spots from when I was 9 years old, trick or treating at this very door. They hadn't changed position, hadn't grown or faded. 25 years, and not a single detail was different. She made a big fuss over Tyler, commenting on his Spider-Man costume, asking his name and age. Then she did something weird. She put her hand on his head, closed her eyes for a second, and nodded, like she was checking something. Then she reached into her giant cauldron of candy and pulled out not one but 3 full-size bars for him. But it wasn't just a casual touch. Her fingers pressed against specific spots on his skull, like she was feeling for something beneath the skin. Tyler winced a little, and I saw her lips moving silently, counting or reciting something. "Mr." Pemberton watched intently, and they exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Satisfaction. Confirmation. Tyler was thrilled with his candy haul. As we walked away, I noticed Mrs. Pemberton doing that same thing with other kids. The hand on the head, the pause, the nod. Some kids got 1 bar. Some got 3. There didn't seem to be a pattern. I watched more carefully. The kids who got 3 bars all had something in common, but I couldn't figure out what. Different ages, different costumes, different ethnicities. But Mrs. Pemberton selected them with purpose, marking them somehow. Her husband kept a small notebook, making quick marks after each child. We went home. Tyler dumped out his haul, and everything seemed fine. Until bedtime. He started complaining about feeling dizzy, said his stomach hurt. I figured it was too much candy, gave him some water and Tums. But then he started burning up. Within an hour, his temperature hit 103. His eyes were the worst part. They kept rolling back, showing just the whites, and he was mumbling things that didn't make sense. Not quite words, but patterns of sound that seemed almost like another language. His hands kept making the same gesture over and over, fingers spread, palm pressing down, like he was trying to push something away. I was about to take him to the ER when my phone rang. It was my neighbor Lisa, sounding panicked. Her daughter was sick too. Same symptoms, same sudden onset. Then my phone started blowing up, text after text from neighborhood parents. All their kids were sick. All of them had visited the Pemberton house. The group chat was chaos. Kids with fevers over 104. Kids speaking in tongues. Kids drawing the same symbol over and over, a circle with 3 lines through it. One mother sent a video of her son standing at his window, pressing his forehead against the glass, pointing toward the Pemberton house and whispering numbers in sequence. Someone called the police. Within an hour, the street was full of ambulances and cop cars. They were taking kids to 3 different hospitals because one ER couldn't handle them all. The police went to question the Pembertons, but the house was dark and no one answered. But here's the thing, neighbors saw them leave. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Mr. and Mrs. Pemberton walking down the street just after sunset, going door to door, not driving, walking. They were checking on the sick children, peering through windows, standing in yards. One father chased them off with a baseball bat, said they were just standing in his driveway, staring up at his daughter's bedroom window, both of them swaying slightly in unison. At the hospital, doctors ran every test imaginable. The kids all had the same symptoms: high fever, elevated white cell count, and something else weird. Their blood showed markers for diseases that didn't make sense. Old diseases, things like scarlet fever, tuberculosis, polio, diseases that had been virtually eradicated. But the kids didn't actually have these diseases, just the antibody markers, like they'd been exposed to them somehow. The head of infectious diseases was baffled. She told me it was like the children's immune systems had suddenly activated against threats that hadn't existed for decades. Some of the markers were for diseases she couldn't even identify, things that weren't in any medical database, ancient things. Tyler was in the hospital for 3 days. Other kids were there longer. Everyone recovered eventually, but it was terrifying. The candy was tested, but came back clean. No poison, no drugs, nothing. The health department couldn't explain what had happened. During those 3 days, I did research, obsessive research. The Pembertons had owned that house for at least 60 years, according to property records, but I found photos of them at town events going back further, much further. A 4th of July picnic in 1962, a Christmas charity drive in 1958, a World War II victory celebration in 1945. Always the same faces, same ages, same 2 wide smiles. The really disturbing part came later. I started researching, talking to longtime neighbors. Turns out, every few years, there's a Halloween where lots of kids get mysteriously sick. Always kids who visited the Pemberton house. always the same weird blood test results. But here's the thing, it's never all the kids who visit, just some of them. I found a pattern in old newspaper archives. 1,996, 1,987, 1,979, 1,971. Every 8 to 9 years, a mysterious illness affecting several local children on Halloween night. The articles were always buried in the back pages, always dismissed as food poisoning or coincidence. But the symptoms were identical to what our kids experienced. I tracked down a woman whose son had gotten sick in 1995. She told me something that made my skin crawl. She said her son, now grown, had never been sick again after that Halloween. Not once. No colds, no flu, no infections. Perfect health for 25 years. She talked to other parents from that year, and their kids were the same. Whatever had made them sick had also changed something in their immune systems, made them stronger somehow. But she also told me about the ones who didn't recover quickly, the kids who stayed sick for weeks instead of days. They were different afterward. Smarter, she said, but colder, less emotional. They all went on to successful careers, doctors, researchers, scientists, but they never seemed quite right. Never married, never had close friends, like something essentially human had been traded for something else. The police never found the Pembertons. The house has been empty since that night. The full-size candy bars were just normal candy from Costco. No explanation for what happened. The official report blamed it on mass hysteria, said the blood test anomalies were lab errors. But I know what I felt when Mrs. Pemberton touched Tyler's head. It was like static electricity, but cold. And I remember how she looked at certain kids, like she was seeing something in them that others didn't have, selecting them for something. Tyler hasn't been sick since that Halloween. Not even a sniffle. He's 12 now, strong as an ox. Sometimes, I wonder if I should be grateful or terrified. The other kids who got sick that night are the same way. Perfect health, perfect attendance at school. Their parents whisper about it sometimes, but no one wants to say it out loud. They all have other changes too. Tyler can do math in his head that should be impossible for his age. He knows things sometimes, says them casually, like when the phone's about to ring, or what someone's about to say. The other kids from that night are the same, top of their classes, but unsettling in ways that are hard to define. The Pemberton house is still empty. Every Halloween, kids dare each other to go knock on the door, but no one ever does. The full-size candy bar legend has become something else now. A warning. Last month, I saw a real estate listing for the house. The price was ridiculously low, and it's been on the market for 3 years. The realtor told me, interested buyers always back out after the inspection, not because of structural problems, but because of the basement. She wouldn't tell me what was down there, just that contractors refused to work on the house. I've thought about trying to track down the Pembertons, finding out what they did and why. But part of me doesn't want to know. Part of me is afraid that if I dig too deep, they might come back. And I don't know if what they gave our kids was a gift or something else. Something that hasn't shown its true purpose yet. Every Halloween, Tyler asks if we can trick or treat on Sycamore Lane. He says he dreams about the Pemberton house sometimes. Dreams where Mrs. Pemberton is calling the children back, saying it's time for the next phase. I always tell him we're going to a different neighborhood. But each year, it gets harder to keep him away. We trick or treat across town now. But sometimes I drive past Sycamore Lane, and I swear I see lights in the Pemberton house windows. Just for a second, like someone's home, waiting. I'd been driving for Uber for about 6 months when Halloween 2019 rolled around. The money on Halloween night was insane. Surge pricing all night, drunk people tipping heavy, constant rides. I planned to drive until 3 or 4 in the morning, make a killing. I was working the Chicago suburbs, picking up costumed partygoers and bar hoppers. Everything was routine until around midnight. That's when I got a ping for a pickup at Resurrection Cemetery. Yeah, that Resurrection Cemetery, the one with all the ghost stories about Resurrection Mary. Now, I'm not superstitious, but picking someone up from a cemetery at midnight on Halloween felt like the start of a bad horror movie. But the surge was 3.5x, and I figured it was probably just cemetery workers or some goth kids doing a Halloween thing. The app showed the pickup point right at the main entrance on Archer Avenue. The rider's name just showed as Mary, no last name, which was unusual. 5-star rating, though, which made me feel a little better. The profile photo was blank, just the default grey silhouette. I pulled up to the main gates, which were closed and locked. No one was around. The cemetery looked different at night. The headstones caught in my headlights seemed to glow, and fog was rolling in from somewhere, thick and unnatural for October. I was about to cancel when I saw her, a woman in a white dress standing about 50 feet inside the cemetery gates. She was waving at me, clearly my passenger. I called out that the gates were locked. She walked closer, and I could see her better in my headlights. Young, maybe early 20s, long blonde hair, vintage-looking white party dress. She looked cold. She pointed to a section where the fence was damaged, a gap just big enough for a person to squeeze through. The dress was what got me. It wasn't a costume. It was real vintage, probably from the 1960s. Cream-colored with pearl buttons, the kind of thing you'd see in old photographs. But it was pristine, like it had just been pressed. No dirt, no tears. Despite her being in a cemetery, her hair was done up in this elaborate style with pin curls, and she was wearing white gloves. Everything about her seemed out of time. Everything in me said to drive away, but she looked so normal, so harmless. Just a girl who needed a ride. Maybe she'd been visiting a grave, got locked in. I told myself I was being paranoid. She squeezed through the fence gap and got in my back seat. The car immediately felt colder, and she smelled like earth and flowers. Not bad, just odd. Like funeral flowers mixed with fresh-turned soil. My breath started fogging up, and the windows began to mist over from the inside. I asked where she was headed, and she gave me an address in Justice, about 15 minutes away. Her voice was soft, had this quality like it was coming from far away. She kept her hands folded in her lap, and I noticed her gloves were yellowed at the fingertips, like old paper. We drove in silence at first. I tried making small talk, asking about her costume, but she just stared out the window. Finally, she spoke. She said she was trying to get home, that she'd been trying for a long time. Her voice was soft, kind of dreamy. She started asking me questions. Did I have someone waiting for me at home? Did I ever feel like time moved differently at night? Had I ever loved someone so much it felt like dying when they left? The questions were strange, but her voice was hypnotic. I found myself answering honestly, telling her about my recent divorce, my loneliness, my night shifts. She asked if I believed in second chances. Strange question, but Halloween brings out the philosophical in people. I said sure, everyone deserves a second chance. She smiled at that, but it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. That's when I noticed the radio had gone to static. Not normal static, it had this pattern to it, like voices trying to break through. The GPS on my phone started glitching, the little blue dot showing my location jumping all over the map. The temperature gauge on my dashboard dropped to the lowest reading, but the engine was running fine. About halfway to the destination, she started telling me a story. Said she'd been at a dance, met a boy, fell in love, in that instant way you do when you're young. They'd danced all night, and he'd offered to drive her home, but they'd been drinking. People didn't think about that stuff as much back then. The car had gone off the road, hit a tree. She'd died on impact. He'd lived, carried that guilt forever. She touched the back of my seat as she talked, and I felt the cold through the fabric. She said she could still hear the music from that dance sometimes, still feel his arms around her. Said every Halloween, she tried to finish that last ride home, but something always went wrong. The driver would get scared, or the sun would come up, or she'd simply fade away before reaching the house. I looked in the rearview mirror to respond, and my blood went cold. The back seat looked empty. I could hear her voice, could smell that earth and flower scent, but in the mirror, nothing. I almost crashed the car, but when I turned around, she was there, solid as could be, looking at me with those sad eyes. She asked me not to be afraid, said she wasn't going to hurt anyone. She just wanted to go home. Just once, she wanted to finish the journey. She reached out and touched my shoulder. Her hand was ice cold, and where she touched, my jacket started to frost over. She told me I was different from the others. Most people couldn't see her at all, and the ones who could usually fled in terror. But I was still driving, still helping. My hands were shaking, but I kept driving. What else could I do? Jump out on the highway, call the cops and say I had a ghost in my car? I focused on the road and tried not to think about what was happening. The address she'd given me was a small house on a quiet street. Looked like it had been built in the 50s. As I pulled up, all the lights were off except for one in an upstairs window. She thanked me for the ride, said I was kind. Then she asked me to wait, just for a minute, to make sure she got inside okay. She got out and walked up to the front door. Didn't knock, just stood there. The porch light flickered on, though I hadn't seen anyone inside move to turn it on. After maybe 30 seconds, the door opened. An elderly man stood there, had to be in his 80s. He looked at her for a long moment, then his face just crumbled. He started crying, reached out like he wanted to touch her but was afraid she'd disappear. I heard him say Mary, just that, just her name. She said something I couldn't hear, and he nodded. Then she stepped forward and hugged him. The porch light flickered, and for just a second, I swear she looked transparent, like I could see through her to the door behind. He was speaking to her, rapidly, desperately. I couldn't make out the words, but I could see his lips moving, see the tears streaming down his face. She put her hand on his cheek, and he closed his eyes. They stood like that for what felt like forever but was probably only seconds. Then, the light steadied, and she was gone. Just gone. The old man was standing there, arms still raised like he was hugging air. But his face, he looked peaceful, like a weight had been lifted. He noticed me watching, raised one hand in a wave, then went inside and closed the door. I sat there for probably 5 minutes, trying to process what I'd seen. Finally checked my phone. The ride was there in my history, but the passenger name just said, Mary. No last name, no profile picture. The payment had processed, $47.50 for a 15-minute ride. The exact fare amount seemed significant somehow. Old prices for an old soul. The car still smelled like funeral flowers. The windows were still fogged. On the back seat, there was a small water stain in the shape of where she'd been sitting. But strangest of all, my phone showed the ride as 5 stars, with a comment, "Thank you for taking me home." I drove home in a daze. Couldn't sleep, so I did what any rational person would do. I Googled, searched for car accidents. Young women named Mary, Justice, Illinois. Found it in an archived newspaper from 1963. Mary Bregovy, 21, killed in a car accident returning from a dance. The driver, her date, was named Joseph Bregovy, same last name. They'd been married just 3 months. The newspaper photo showed a young woman who looked exactly like my passenger. Same face, same hairstyle, even the same dress. The article mentioned she'd been driving home from a Halloween dance at the Willowbrook Ballroom. Her husband had survived with minor injuries but never remarried, never moved from their little house in Justice. I found Joseph's obituary too, from 3 days after my ride. Said he'd died peacefully in his sleep, finally reunited with his beloved wife Mary after 56 years. The funeral notice mentioned he'd spent every Halloween waiting for her, believing she'd come home someday. His family thought it was dementia, but he never wavered. Every October 31st, he'd turn on the porch light and wait. I've never told anyone this part, but the obituary included a photo of Joseph as a young man. I recognized him. Not from that night. He was far too old. But I'd seen that face before, in my car, just for a second. When Mary disappeared and the old man closed the door, I thought I saw someone else on the porch, a young man in a 1960 suit, taking her hand, leading her inside. I've thought about that night constantly for the past 5 years, tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an elaborate prank, maybe I had some kind of episode, but I know what I experienced. And I have that ride in my history, that payment in my account. I looked up the house last year. It's been sold, renovated, a young family lives there now. They have no idea about Mary and Joseph. But every Halloween, they told the realtor, The porch light turns on by itself at midnight, just for a few minutes. They've had electricians check it, but no one can find a problem. It's become a quirky feature they tell guests about at parties. I still drive Uber, but never on Halloween. And I never pick up near cemeteries, no matter how high the surge. Some money isn't worth earning, some rides aren't meant to be taken, and some journeys take longer to complete than others. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and see someone in white by the side of the road, I slow down, just in case, because everyone deserves to make it home eventually. And maybe, just maybe, I was meant to be the one who finally got her there. After all those years of waiting, after all those Halloween nights of trying, Mary Bregovi finally made it home. I think about Joseph too, waiting all those years, never giving up hope. His family thought he was crazy, but he knew she'd find a way back to him. Love like that doesn't die, not even when the people do. It just waits, patient and eternal, for the right moment to reunite. That's why I can't dismiss what happened as a hallucination or a prank. It was too real, too specific, too full of pain and love and longing. I was just the driver, the facilitator of something that needed to happen, and in a strange way, I'm grateful. In all my nights of driving, all the drunk passengers and long shifts, that one ride meant something. I helped two souls find each other again.